this is one of those great unknown stories, and again, I'm a bibliography machine here, but there's a great grandmother of women's history, Anne Fierro Scott,
Right.
and she wrote a tiny little book called Natural Allies, and it was about this movement from about the 1820s onward.
But it starts even in the 18th century.
Even in the very earliest, we have women getting together doing, but this sort of feeling that, having been told that women were the angels of the hearth, more moral than men, so moral they can't be sullied by politics, they decide, if we're so good, we should go out and change the world. And what you trace, and we'll take 1800 as a date, though it's before that, 1800 to 1900, they literally changed the landscape of America. You see streets. Do you see street lights? Do you see hospitals? Charity organizations of all kind. It's because women said we must do this. And in doing it, they changed our notion of what the government owes the individual.
Sure.
So they became the beginning of the welfare state. And the sort of the climax of all this is once women become professionalized in the late 1800s, they become things like social workers, and they become consumer league organizers, and they get one of their own in the White House, and her name was Frances Perkins, and she had this idea that we should have child labor, we should have an 8-hour workday, and she got it all. Everything she wanted except universal health care.
But what they had to do was go to the state legislature. Think how political this was. Go to the state legislature, lobby to incorporate, because they couldn't own property. They were married women for the most part. They always made sure their treasurer was an unmarried lady, so the husband couldn't seize the assets of the organization. And then, create the institution, then go back to the legislature to lobby for funds, or to the public at large. I mean, it's a highly political, public set of actions designed to better the society. But they found ways to own property without changing the law.
Yes.
No.
It may be one of American women's less thrilling accomplishments that we actually innovated the role of the lobbyist. Maybe that kind of got out of hand. There's plenty of women who literally took to the halls of Congress because they weren't allowed in, and they lobbied. Yeah.
Actually, I'll just tell you this quickly. There's a wonderful letter that I found just, at sort of the end of a writing day that's in Ladies of Liberty. That was an unpublished letter of Louisa Cathrine Adams, John Quincy Adams' wife. And she wrote it in 1820, the year of the Missouri Compromise. He was Secretary of State, and she was writing these wonderful letters home to old John Adams. Abigail was dead, and she was amusing him with the goings-on in Washington. And that year, because of the Missouri Compromise, Congress stayed in session much longer than usual. They usually adjourned in March. They stayed till the end of May. It was a disaster. Washington was running out of food. Nobody knew what to do with all of these members of Congress, still around. Finally, they go home. June, she goes to a meeting of the trustees of the orphan asylum that Dolly Madison and others had helped establish after the British invasion in 1814. And she gets there, and one of the trustees said, I'm reading this letter. It's just so wonderful. The trustee says to her, we're going to need a new building next year. Why? Congress had stayed so long that there were 40 women who would be needing to avail themselves of the services of the. And she's writing to John Adams, and she says, so I suggested in the next session that those great and moral fathers take the $2 a day in additional pay they've voted themselves and use it to create a foundling institution for their offspring.
Wow.
Oh, God, it doesn't get any better than that.
This discussion has taken an unsavory turn. I want to be the one to say it.
Other questions? Yes.
Given that you were saying, Dr. Holton, that it was a pro-capitalist constitution, even though we know that women have been interested in the economy forever, they weren't recognized in the formal economy. I wonder if that is part of why they have, at least at the founding, were those.
I think yes. That the movement, as you know, was more towards of a cash economy and more towards work being separated from the home, and all of those things were happening in the 19th century, and all of those things are things that are making women's economic production more hidden. I'm curious to ask you, and this will go to your question. I've been reading a bunch of the Abigail Adams stuff lately. I don't think any clothes were made in her house. Cloth. There was no spinning and no weaving in her house. She would buy cloth, and as you
that first house was so small you couldn't fit a loom.
Right. Yeah, you
no,
literally
I
could
mean
not
it.
get a loom.
You could not
there.
get a loom in there.
Much less a spinning wheel. And so I think. What was I going to say? There a lot of that production was going on, but it was becoming increasingly hidden. So yeah, it's interesting. That same language, ghost that you were talking about, has also been used for ordinary white men at the Constitution, but in a different sense. That is, that the Constitution was sort of constantly looking over its shoulder.
Yes. Ooh.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, but you know, sort of that's why I was intrigued by your talk, because there's ghosts in different senses.
Yes.
One that they're fearing, and the other that they're. I'm not sure fear is the right word for the description of the Founding Fathers' attitude towards their women. That they were more of a cause of uncertainty and
puzzlement.
Yeah.
So 'twas ever thus.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I know there are the ghosts behind your shoulder, but then there are the ladylike ghosts that sit back and wait their turn. And I think these women were just sort of out there. And of course, I'm talking about women sort of in a larger way. But yes, I think you're right. But let me say that under coverture, it wasn't that these women's economic contributions were being ignored because they weren't separate. So if you say the contribution ignored, no, Joseph Smith, his wife, not Joseph Smith and his wife, Joseph Smith, his wife, the corporation that was Joseph Smith, produced 17 bolts of cloth a year and pounds of butter, and they brought in borders and all that. And you might say, but it was the woman who did that. Her accomplishments are being recognized. That's the point. These women weren't individuals who made individual contributions that would be counted. Their contributions were counted. They were just counted as male. So they were the property of their husband. So that's why they're not seen as individual economic actors that need to be accounted for. That's the problem.
Yes.
In the 1970s, there was a campaign that many women that are of my age remember, the Equal Rights Amendment. And part of the discussion around the Equal Rights Amendment was that for 100 years it had been introduced into Congress. Since that time, there has not been any great movement again to include women officially in the Constitution, although through legislation our rights have increased, especially in the economic sphere. I wonder if you have any historical reason for that, especially is this directly to this topic?
This is what I was sort of talking about, the bringing culture back. Yeah, I'm just starting this work. That's the problem. Why not get rid of it? I mean, it's coverture. For the most part, it doesn't affect our lives too terribly much, though I am collecting modern-day stories of coverture, so give them to me. People who try to file their taxes and the IRS loses it because they don't have their husband's last name, and I love those. But why don't we just get rid of it? Why didn't they just abolish it? They did chip away at it, and it chipped away so that, we do have equal pay in certain kinds of ways, and all these rights. We get to go to school, and we get to have credit of our own and all that good stuff. But the Equal Rights Amendment was saying, why not just say we're equal? And that'll cover everything. Anything you haven't thought of, that'll cover. And I must tell you that I was listening to Justice Talking, wonderful NPR program that is now gone. But it was talking about the Equal Rights Amendment. I thought, hey, I want to hear this, right? And they had somebody come in and argue the pro-equal rights case, which, I'm all for, but I wanted to hear the anti. Like, what's this person going to say against equal rights for women? And it was a woman. And this was her argument. And I was all set. And it was, we don't really need it. And the pro person had just given all these ways and places and odd little moments and corners of legal and legislative that was discriminating against women. All these examples that would have to be dealt with one at a time, one court case at a time. And why not? Why don't we just say they're equal? Well, we can handle this stuff as it comes up. If there's an employment discrimination here or there's a voting irregularity there, we'll just handle it when it comes up. And I don't know why we just don't say. And all I can imagine is there's some deep fear